The moment my son-in-law leaned back in his chair and said with that practiced smile, "Margaret, let's be honest, you're becoming a burden here. Maybe it's time you found your own place," I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, just clarity. My daughter Sarah sat frozen beside him, her eyes fixed on her plate, and I knew she wouldn't defend me. I stood slowly, walked to the drawer, and pulled out the keys to the house my late husband and I had purchased for them. I set them gently on the kitchen counter. "You're right, Derek," I said quietly. "It is time." I didn't pack. I didn't argue. I simply walked out into the cool evening air and drove away. Behind me, I heard Derek laugh, that confident sound of a man who thought he'd just won. What he didn't know was that everything he thought he owned was about to slip through his fingers like water. By morning, the calls started. First Sarah, confused and guilty, then Derek, irritated. By afternoon, his tone had changed to panic. By evening, his lawyer was calling. And by the next day, Derek Matthews discovered the truth that would unravel his entire world. The house wasn't his. The accounts weren't accessible. The investments he'd been counting on were beyond his reach, and the frail old widow he'd pushed out had more power than he'd ever imagined. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 68 years old, a retired forensic accountant who spent 40 years tracking money through corporate mazes. My husband Thomas passed 3 years ago, and in his final months, he warned me about something I didn't want to believe. He warned me about Derek. I had moved in with Sarah and Derek after Thomas died, believing their invitation came from love. For 3 years, I tried to be helpful, cooking, managing household accounts, picking up my grandson James from school. But somewhere along the way, helpfulness became expectation, and expectation curdled into resentment. That night at dinner, Derek had set down his fork and fixed me with a look I'd come to recognize. "Margaret, we need to talk about your situation here. You've been here 3 years now. Let's be honest, you're becoming a burden. The extra expenses, the space you take up, it's not sustainable." Sarah said nothing. My 14-year-old grandson James stood abruptly, his voice shaking. "This is wrong. Grandma's not a burden. She's family." "James, go to your room," Derek snapped. "This is an adult conversation." James looked at me, his eyes pleading, then left. The footsteps on the stairs were heavy with anger and helplessness. I thought of Thomas in that moment. 2 weeks before he died, he'd asked me to sit with him in his hospital room. "Margaret," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to listen carefully. Derek isn't who he pretends to be. I had him investigated. There are things you need to know. Promise me you'll protect yourself and Sarah when the time comes." I'd promised, though I hadn't fully understood, but I'd kept the sealed envelope he gave me, marked with instructions not to open until I needed it. And I'd started paying attention to the man my daughter had married. Now, sitting at this table while Derek dismantled my place in my daughter's life, I finally understood what Thomas had seen. When I placed those keys on the counter and walked out, Derek called after me, "Where will you even go, Margaret? You don't have anywhere." I paused and turned slightly. Don't I? The question hung in the air, simple and quiet. Derek's confident expression faltered for just a moment, but before he could respond, I stepped through the door and into the night. I drove without a destination, letting the roads guide me. By dawn, I found myself at Linda Morrison's house. Linda had been Thomas's attorney for 20 years and had become a friend. She'd helped execute Thomas's plans, and she'd been waiting, like I had, for Derek to make his move. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I arrived. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and nodded. "He finally did it," she said. "He finally did it," I confirmed. "Come in, we have work to do." Over tea in her study, I told her everything. When she finished, Linda was already pulling files from her cabinet. "Good," she said. "It's better this way. If he'd been smart, he would have waited, but he got impatient, and impatient people make mistakes." She opened the first file. Inside was the deed to the house Derek and Sarah lived in. "The property is still in your name, solely yours after Thomas's death.
They're technically guests, not tenants. You can revoke their right to live there with 30 days written notice.
Sarah doesn't know? Derek told her the house was gifted to them. She believed him, but the transfer documents were never signed, never filed. Thomas made sure of that. The second file contained bank records. The joint account Sarah thought she shared with Derek was actually a household expense account I'd funded. The real accounts, the investment portfolios Thomas and I had built over 40 years, were in my name alone. Total liquid assets? Linda asked. Approximately $2.8 million, plus the house worth another $800,000. And Derek thinks? He thinks Sarah will inherit everything when I die. I found spreadsheets on his laptop last year, projecting my life expectancy, calculating return on investment. Linda's eyes went cold. Do you have copies? Of everything. I pulled out my phone, showing the cloud storage with 2 years of evidence. Financial documents, recordings, photographs, emails, all time-stamped. Margaret, you're still the best forensic accountant I've ever known. We worked until past midnight, planning every move. The strategy was simple but devastating. We would let Derek try to claim what he believed was his, then systematically dismantle every assumption he'd built his plans on. By morning, my phone had 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. Derek's tone shifted from annoyed to concerned to panicked. The early messages were apologetic. By mid-morning, they changed entirely. We need to talk about the house situation. There seems to be confusion about the property deed. Call me back immediately. Derek had figured it out faster than expected. By noon, his lawyer called me. Miss Chen, I'm calling on behalf of Derek Matthews regarding the property at 2847 Willow Creek Drive. There seems to be confusion about ownership. Your client was mistaken, I said calmly. Surely we can resolve this amicably. Your daughter and grandson live there. I'm not displacing my daughter or grandson. I'm simply clarifying who owns the property. I hung up. Linda gave me an approving nod. That afternoon, James called from school. Grandma, are you okay? Dad is freaking out. He says you stole something from us. I didn't steal anything, James, but there are some things about your father you should know. I already know, he said softly. I've known for a while. Can I come see you after school? I have something to show you. When James arrived at Linda's house, he looked older than 14. He pulled out his laptop. I've been collecting evidence, he said, for 8 months. He opened a folder containing hundreds of files, screenshots, recordings, documents, photographs, all time-stamped. It started last year when I found a folder on Dad's computer. It had spreadsheets about you, Grandma, about your health, your age, your life expectancy. There were calculations, like you were some kind of investment. He showed me the documents, then clicked to another folder, audio files. I started recording family dinners, their arguments when they thought I couldn't hear. He played one file, Derek's voice, clear and cold. Your mother is draining us dry, Sarah. Every day she stays is another day we can't move forward. We need to accelerate the timeline. There's hours of this, Grandma. Him planning what he'll do with the money when you're gone, convincing Mom that you're the problem. Why didn't you tell me? I asked gently. Because I'm 14 and he's my dad, and I thought maybe I was wrong. But then last night happened and I knew I wasn't. I pulled my grandson into a hug, this brave boy who'd been carrying such heavy knowledge alone. When Linda reviewed everything James had collected, she nodded with professional precision. This is extraordinary. Combined with what your grandmother has and what your grandfather left us, we have an overwhelming case. Case for what? James asked. I took a breath. James, your father isn't who he pretends to be. His real name is Derek Masterson, and he's done this before. Targeted vulnerable families, positioned himself to inherit wealth. Your grandfather discovered this before he died. I explained about the envelope Thomas had left me, the investigation he'd commissioned. Derek had been born Derek Masterson in Nevada, where he'd been investigated for elder financial exploitation. He'd befriended an elderly couple,
gained their trust, been named in their will. When they died, their children contested the inheritance. The case settled, Derek took the money, changed his name, and moved. In California, he'd targeted a widow named Patricia Chen, convinced her to loan him $200,000 for a real estate investment. She never saw the money again. Before her family could act, Derek vanished.
He'd resurfaced in our city 3 years later with a new name and polished backstory. He'd researched our family before he ever approached Sarah at that charity event where they randomly met. Thomas's letter had been clear. Derek knows I'm suspicious. He's waiting for me to die so he can consolidate his position. I won't live to protect our daughter, but you will. I've restructured everything to make sure he can never access what we built. James processed this, pieces clicking into place. So everything he told us about his past? Lies, I confirmed. Carefully constructed lies. James's jaw set with determination. What do we do? How do we stop him? Linda smiled. We let him keep digging his own grave, and when he's buried himself deep enough, we show him who he really is. The next morning, Derek received a certified letter. Margaret Chen was revoking residential privileges at 2847 Willow Creek Drive. They had 30 days to vacate. James described Derek's reaction, standing in the kitchen, reading the letter over and over, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and fear. Sarah had been confused, asking questions Derek couldn't answer without revealing his lies. That afternoon, Derek appeared at Linda's office, demanding to speak with me. When he was shown into the conference room, I was sitting calmly, 2 years of evidence arranged in folders before me. "Margaret," he said, deploying his charming smile, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding, Derek. Please sit down." He sat, calculating, trying to find the angle. "I was stressed, said things I didn't mean. Sarah is devastated. We want you to come home." "The house isn't your home, Derek. It's mine." "That's just a technicality. Your husband obviously intended to transfer the deed." "The paperwork wasn't lost. It was deliberately not filed. Thomas wanted the property to stay in my name." Derek's smile faltered. "Why would he do that?" "Because he knew who you are." The temperature dropped. Derek went still. "I don't know what you mean." Linda opened the first folder and slid a document across, an old driver's license from public records. The picture was clearly Derek, 10 years younger. The name read Derek James Masterson. "My husband hired an investigator 6 months before your wedding," he began. "He found your real name, your real history, and the pattern of elder financial exploitation that brought you to our city." Derek's face went pale. "That's not me." "It is you." Another document. Court filings from Nevada. "The Johnsons. You were named in their will shortly before they died. Their children contested. The case settled. You took the money, changed your name, and moved." "I was cleared." "You took a settlement to avoid trial." Another document. "Patricia Chen. You convinced her to loan you $200,000. She never saw it again. You vanished before her family could act." Derek's hands shook. "This is slander." "These are court records, public documents." I pushed the folder toward him, showing the paper trail from Derek Masterson to Derek Matthews. "You researched us, found out my husband was successful, that we had assets, that Sarah was kind and trusting. You planned this from the beginning." "Sarah loves me," Derek said, voice losing confidence. "Sarah loves who she thinks you are. Once she knows the truth, we'll see if that love survives." "You can't tell her. It would destroy her. What will destroy her is staying married to a man who sees her as a means to an end." Derek lunged to his feet. "You bitter old woman. You can't stand that your daughter chose me over you." Linda spoke, her voice cold. "Mr. Masterson, I suggest you sit down. We're recording this conversation." Derek noticed the camera mounted in the corner. His expression crumbled. "What do you want?" he asked finally. I want you to sign a legal separation agreement. I want you to relinquish any claim to the house, to Sarah, to my family. I want you to disappear the way you did after Patricia Chen. And if I don't, then I release everything to the police, the media, and Sarah. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. Your real estate license will be revoked. The authorities in Nevada and California will be very interested in where Derek Masterson has been, and Sarah will know her entire marriage was built on lies. Derek sat heavily, head in hands. For a long moment, silence. I do love her, he said finally, almost genuine. Maybe not at first, but I do now. She's good and kind, and she deserves better than this. She does, I agreed, which is why you're going to let her go. Linda slid the separation papers across. Derek read through them slowly. I watched something die in his eyes. The con, the long game, the future he'd planned, all crumbling. If I sign this, what happens to me? You leave town. You start over, hopefully more honestly. But Derek, if you ever come near my family again, if you ever target another vulnerable person, I will make sure everyone knows who you are. These documents will go to every police department, every licensing board. You'll never run another con again. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. Then he signed, heavy and final. I need to get my things from the house. You have 24 hours. After that, the locks change. Derek stood and walked to the door. He paused, turned back. You know, Margaret, you're a lot tougher than you look. I'm a lot tougher than you thought, I corrected. That was your first mistake. He left without another word. The next morning, I called Sarah. Meet me at Linda Morrison's office tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything then. Can't you just tell me now? Not over the phone, sweetheart. Some things need to be said face to face. Sarah arrived looking exhausted, eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she ran forward and threw her arms around me. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I've been such a terrible daughter. You're not terrible. You've been manipulated by someone very skilled at deception. Sit down. There's something you need to know about Derek. Over the next 2 hours, Linda and I walked Sarah through everything. Thomas's investigation, Derek's real identity, the previous victims, the court documents, the recordings James had made, the spreadsheets calculating my life expectancy. Every piece of evidence laid out methodically, undeniably. Sarah sat frozen, growing paler with each revelation. When we played Derek's audio discussing the timeline from my death, she began to shake. When we showed her documents proving his lies, she broke down completely. My whole marriage, she whispered. None of it was real? His feelings may have become real over time, Sarah, but the foundation was built on lies and calculation. He targeted our family, Sarah. He targeted you to get to me. How long have you known? Thomas discovered it before he died. I've known the full truth for 2 years. 2 years? Why didn't you tell me? Because you loved him. Because you wouldn't have believed me without proof. Because I needed for him to reveal himself. Sarah walked to the window, staring out. I feel like such a fool. You're not a fool. You're a woman who trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not weakness. That's being human. She turned back, something shifting in her expression, clarity returning. James, she said suddenly, James tried to tell me. Last month he said Dad was acting strange. I told my son he was being disrespectful. Her voice broke. I chose Derek over my own son's instincts. James understands. He's been waiting for you to see the truth. Where is Derek now? Gone, Linda said. He signed separation papers yesterday. He has 24 hours to collect his belongings, then he's leaving town. Sarah sank back. What happens now? Now you decide, I said. The house is yours to live in as long as you want. The accounts your father and I set up are still there, protected. James's education is secure. You have choices, Sarah. real choices. Sarah was quiet. Then she looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the girl she used to be. "I want to come home, Mom. Not to that house. Home, with you." "6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of a new house, smaller but filled with light. Sarah hummed while she cooked dinner, having reclaimed joy she'd lost. Through the window, I could see James in the backyard, showing his mother the birdhouse he'd built in my woodworking shed. The old house had sold quickly. Sarah couldn't bear the memories. We donated half the proceeds to an organization helping victims of financial elder abuse. The rest went into James's education fund. Derek had disappeared as promised. Linda heard he'd moved to Oregon, working under his real name for the first time in a decade. We'd kept our evidence, ready to release if he ever tried to victimize anyone again. Sarah had thrown herself into therapy, working through the trauma. She was dating again, cautiously, and this time she listened when James or I expressed concerns. The three of us had become a unit, a family rebuilt on honesty instead of secrets. James started high school with confidence I hadn't seen before. He'd learned young that trust had to be earned, that love without respect was worthless, that speaking truth mattered even when hard. Thomas would have been proud. As for me, I'd discovered something surprising. I didn't need Derek's validation to know my worth. I'd spent 3 years doubting myself, wondering if I really was the burden he claimed. But I wasn't. I'd never been. I was a 68-year-old woman who'd built a career tracking fraud, who'd raised a daughter, who'd loved a good man for 35 years, and who'd protected her family when they couldn't protect themselves. I was Margaret Chen, and I was enough. My phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Derek's real estate license was permanently revoked in 3 states. The investigation you triggered is ongoing. He'll never do this to anyone else." I smiled. Through the window, I watched my daughter laugh at something James said, watched my grandson's face light up with joy. This was what Thomas had fought for. This moment, this family, this peace. Sarah called from the backyard. "Mom, come see what James built." I walked outside into the golden afternoon light, where my daughter and grandson waited, where I belonged. Derek had called me a burden, tried to make me believe I was taking up space in a life that wasn't mine. But he'd been wrong about everything. The space was mine. The life was mine. The victory was mine. And he'd learned too late the most important lesson. Never underestimate a woman who knows her worth. Never underestimate a mother protecting her child. And never, ever underestimate a forensic accountant who spent 40 years following money trails. I hadn't just protected my family's wealth. I'd protected something far more valuable. I'd protected our love, our trust, and our future. As I stood in my new backyard, surrounded by the family I'd saved, I thought of Thomas. I hoped he could see this, that I'd finished what he started, that I'd been strong enough, smart enough, brave enough. The cardinal sang from the oak tree, the same song it had sung every spring since we were young, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt complete. This is the story of how a son-in-law learned that underestimating his mother-in-law was the biggest mistake of his life, how a widow called useless proved she was irreplaceable, how a family nearly destroyed by deception found its way back to truth. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the quietest people carry the most power. Sometimes patience is stronger than rage, and sometimes justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. Remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Your value is not diminished by those who try to take from you, and your strength is not measured by how loud you are, but how steady you remain when everything tries to shake you. Until next time, stand firm, protect what matters, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are.